Hello, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar, Homework Tips for Success. We are so excited to share this valuable information to not only help you in understanding what is the root of your child's homework challenges, but also give you some actionable steps to help your child cut down on stress, to increase productivity during homework time. Before we get started, I wanted to share a couple housekeeping items. First, we wanted to say thank you so much for all of those who joined us today. We have an overwhelming response to these webinars. We're really excited about it. We appreciate you taking the time out of your day to join us. We want these webinars to help you, so please enter your questions, enter your comments. Maybe if you want to put a comment in that says some other things that we could help you with in these webinars. We love your questions, we love your comments, and even if they're specific to your family and your family's challenges or struggles, we will try our best to get to all of them at the end. Second, we will be recording this webinar, and it's going to be sent out to all those who registered, so you can view it anytime on demand, even if you need to leave early today. Next, I'd like to take this opportunity to introduce today's speaker, Rebecca Jackson, who is our Vice President of Programs and Outcomes for Brain Balance Achievement Centers. Rebecca is joining us today with years and years of firsthand experience serving as Executive Director for multiple Brain Balance Centers. She is a wealth of knowledge. She's incredibly passionate about designing these webinars so that, to put it simply, we can help families with the challenges that they face daily. So with that, I will pass it along to Rebecca Jackson.
Thanks, Victoria. So how many of you out there have had that moment or experience of sitting there after school, talking to your child, saying, come on, try harder, focus, you can do this. Nope, erase that. I can't read it. If I can't read it, your teacher can't. And it builds and it builds and it builds, and your frustration builds and your child's frustration builds, and it ends up in meltdown, and the homework still isn't done. And you're rushing because you have soccer practice and dinner, and the house is a mess and the dog is barking. I feel like if anybody has a parent or a kid out there with school-aged kids, that this can become our afternoon so easily. So we wanted to take the time today, here we are at the beginning of the school year, to look at what can we do to try to have it be a more positive, more successful homework experience, not just for your child, but for you as well. Because let's face it, if we've got a child that's frustrating and melting down, if we have a child that just isn't in a good place, it impacts the whole family. When we get frustrated, our kids, it amps up their frustration. So at this start to the school year, really kind of thinking through and talking through how can we make this a more positive experience, because the reality is for most of us, homework isn't going away. And it's interesting because there's been a ton of research recently talking about really looking at the fact of how productive is homework time really. So there are a few schools that are going away from homework, but they're few and far between. And in fact, I had a friend whose child was in a 5th grade class where they didn't do homework, but then switched to middle school. And that was a really tough transition of going from not being used to having homework at all to then the middle school load of homework. So regardless of our personal thoughts or feelings or belief on homework, for most of us, it's a reality. And so it's a reality that we want to help to improve the experience of as much as we can. So again, the question that we're asking today is, how would a more pleasant homework experience impact your child and your family, and hopefully set you up for a more positive school year? So one of the things that I want to talk about or think about is the fact that kids sit all day long. There was a really interesting article I read a couple years ago, and it was a journalist that had been a high school teacher for years and then switched from education into journalism. And he was doing an article around the high school experience. And so he went and followed the schedule of a high school student for several days. And what he found, he said, would have completely changed the way he approached teaching. He found that at the end of each day, he was exhausted and drained. He had a headache. He was bored out of his mind. And what he found was just sitting all day with very little opportunity for movement and interaction really just wore out his brain. And it was interesting because even classes where they said, this is a highly participatory class, there's student involvement, student engagement, so often what would happen is 45 minutes of instruction and an opportunity for 10 to 15 minutes of discussion. So when you look at that throughout the day, it so often ends up being hours and hours added up of being seated and less time moving. And our Fortune 500 companies are doing a great job of studying that to realize that movement actually increases productivity. And you see more and more oops, I'm going to go back, sorry, things like the stand-up desks, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. But the concept that using our muscles wakes up the brain is something that we're going to talk about a lot here today, and that I talk about often in general. So we need to keep in mind that our kids have sat all day long, and then they're coming home from school. And knowing that giving them an opportunity to not go straight from sitting into more sitting is going to, again, set us all up for more success. We also know that in order for kids to sit down and do homework, we need their attention and focus. But so often what we forget or don't realize or don't make the connection on is that good attention and focus is the result of good development. So if we have a child that struggles with attention and focus, oftentimes that's the same child that may have some gaps and holes in their development. It doesn't mean that they're going to be dramatically behind across the board. In fact, we can see oftentimes kids with gaps and holes in development might actually be ahead of their peers in terms of their aptitude. They can be very intelligent kids, but what we might see is more fluctuation and less consistency in their behaviors, in their academics, in their organization and follow through. And so the child that struggles or has a hard time with attention and focus, that homework time is going to be even more difficult. They've had to work so hard all day long to hold their body still, to pay attention, to follow along. And for so many of our kids, they might be able to hold it together throughout the day, but it might have required a tremendous amount of work and effort to do that. And so we get home and we have more of a tendency for that meltdown when they get home. It doesn't mean that school is a good place and the home environment is problematic. It may simply mean that they had to work so hard to hold it together that it took a toll, and you may see more of those challenging behaviors at home. So again, what we're going to see is if a child has gaps and holes in their development, everything in development happens in a series or a chain of events. And ultimately, we want our kids to have great attention and focus, good organization and prioritizing, the ability to take notes and retain what they're looking at and taking in. But those are all high-level brain development pieces. So if there are any gaps and holes along the way, it's going to make it more difficult for those high-level pieces to come together. And those high-level pieces are what set us up for success with our academics. So what are some red flags for concern that there may be some gaps and holes in development? There may be some pieces that's going to make that classroom time and attention and focus more challenging, which can also result in more challenging time with homework. These are just some of the most common ones that we see over and over with our brain balance students. For many of our students, they have a hard time getting started. So you might find that once your child sits down and focuses, that they can actually get through the work pretty quickly. It might take you just as long to convince them to sit down and get out their pencil and paper and to get started as it does to get the work itself done. So that hard time initiating, hard time getting started on something can be a red flag for a gap or hole in development. The need for frequent redirection. Again, when you're sitting there working with your child saying, come on, focus right here, pay attention, we got to get through this, let's focus. That frequent need for redirection can be a red flag. Development obviously happens over a series of years and years and years, and we have different expectations for kids at different age levels. We don't expect a 2-year-old to be able to sit and read an entire book or sit for 45 minutes to work on numbers and letters. We do have that expectation of an older child. And so often what we'll see is we might have a 10-year-old whose attention and focus may be more consistent with that of a 5-year-old. But as parents, we look at that body age and size, and as educators, and say, come on, you're 10 years old, you're in 5th grade, you should be able to X, Y, and Z. So that frequent need for redirection, again, may be a red flag that attention and focus developmentally is not matching up with body age. The frequent need for repetition. There's an area of our brain, memory is a complex piece with many areas of the brain feeding into it. And for some of our kids, what we see is, again, it's not that they're not intelligent, but they may need more repetition to get something into their long-term memory. So what you'll see with this child is you might work on something, maybe you're working on math facts, and you work on it that night until they've got it. And then you sit down with them again the next night to review, and you feel like, oh my gosh, did we get anywhere at all last night? So if you're seeing that where your child is just needing more repetition in order to get things to stick, that can be a sign. Handwriting, with handwriting, there's a couple pieces that we can look at. The size of handwriting, and so is it appropriate for the space? The spacing of the handwriting, where again, sometimes we have kids that the words run together, and so they're not putting spaces between the words. Maybe it's their words are writing at a slant rather than across a straight line. For some of our kids, if they're pushing really hard, and you can tell if they're pushing hard because if you flip the paper over and you run your hands across the back of the paper, for the child that's pushing really hard, you can feel the bumps coming through on the other side of the paper. The child that's pushing really hard or writing larger than what they should, that's often or can be an indicator that it's requiring more work and energy and effort. They don't have the control and dexterity that they should have for that to be light and easy and fluid. So for that child that's pushing very hard and writing larger, it's going to require more energy and effort to do that handwriting piece. So again, we might see more pushback, more avoidance strategies because we're asking them to do something that just requires more work and energy and effort. With some kids, we'll see challenging with sequences. So they might be able to tell you bits and pieces of the TV show that they watched last night, but in retelling the story, having a difficult time putting that in the appropriate order. We have kids that you know, maybe it's an older child and it's a writing assignment, and if you were to say, okay, buddy, first tell me what you want to write about, and they tell you this incredible story, and we look at them and say, great, now just write that down, and you hit a roadblock there. The parts of the brain required to say something out loud are as fewer parts of the brain as required to put something on paper. So when we're asking a child to write out their thoughts or their story or a summary of something, we're asking them to use many separate regions of the brain all together in coordination. So if there is a gap and hole impacting one or more of those areas, it's going to be more difficult to pull it all together and put it on paper. And again, as parents, we look at that and say, well, you just said it to me just fine. So you know, what's the holdup? What's the problem? Why can't you just write that down? Organization and prioritizing is a huge piece, and this becomes more and more obvious and more important as kids get older. I had a parent say to me one time that she knew her child needed brain balance because she had multiple kids, and this was her youngest child. And with her older children, she saw as they got older, she was able to pull back more and more, not needing to check their folder to see if they had homework that night, not needing to follow up to be sure they turned in their paper. But with the child that she brought to brain balance, she found that over time she was needing to become more involved rather than less involved. Because when our kids go from 4th grade to 5th grade and they're prepping them for middle school and there's more teachers and more folders, and then they go to middle school where there's 8 different teachers in 8 different classrooms, there's more to coordinate and organize. And then another big red flag for concern is simply spending more time than their peers. So if you're not sure, gosh, is my child's homework load consistent, check with other families in the class to see, you know, how many nights a week is your child coming home with homework? And when they do, how much time are they spending on it? So those are just a couple pieces that can point out to you hey, there may be some pieces here more difficult than what they need to be. And if it's related to a gap and hole in development, then addressing and maturing those gaps and holes in development can have a positive impact on these complications that can make that time a little bit more frustrating. The next thing that we see with our kids is when they come home from school, so often they come home hungry, tired, cranky. I know even just picking my kids up from school, just getting in the car, I've got a 4th grader and a 6th grader, and they both want to tell me all about their day, but they're interrupting each other, and that level of fatigue and frustration and irritation is high. So one of the things I found is I like to bring a snack and hand it to them in the car. So feed them right away so that we can kind of help get them back on track. And so when they come home hungry, tired, crabby, and we know that they've got a bunch of homework that we need to get through quickly to make it to soccer practice, starting with feeding them can be key. Next piece is wake them up. Like we talked about earlier, our kids are spending the majority of their school day seated. Our muscles rev and fire the brain. So when the kids aren't using their muscles and aren't moving, they tend to be more sluggish and tired. My kids are on a break right now, and my daughter yesterday spent a big portion of the day reading, and she was moping around the house, dragging her feet, and kept saying, "I'm so tired, I'm so tired." But she hadn't moved all day. She had spent the whole day just lounging around. So teaching our kids that we use our muscles to wake up our brain and teaching that as a lifelong strategy is going to be really important. And so if we want them to sit down and focus and have a good attitude on homework, we also need to wake them up to get them moving and thinking. Next thing is to cheer them up. Again, they might have had a great day at school, but they come home tired and hungry, and now they're a little bit irritable and cranky. And so before we sit down to do something that they probably really don't want to do, taking a few minutes to connect with who you know your child is, to kind of hit that reset button for that homework time can be great. So when we talk about feeding them, what do I mean when I say feed them in order to have them focus? There's 3 key areas that I want you to think about for your child for success for focus and homework time. And hydration is the first one. Every cell in our body requires water. And so if our kids are at all dehydrated, that can have a huge impact on their mood, their energy, their ability to think and focus. That sluggishness, hydration has a huge impact on that. And our kids tend to want to gravitate towards those sugary drinks because they taste good. And the more sugar we have, the more sugar we crave. But sugar isn't the key of what to do here with hydration. Is we want to make sure that our kids are drinking fluids that are going to hydrate them. There's a lot of different ways to do that. My kids love those emergency packets. So they're full of electrolytes and vitamin C. You can get electrolyte water, but the reality is just getting your kids used to drinking water is a good thing. Get the kids involved with them. Ask them to make and flavor their own water. So we'll set out a big water pitcher on the counter, and the kids will put in sometimes really good things, sometimes really gross things. But some fun combinations is putting in basil from the garden, and they'll plop in a couple strawberries or put in a couple slices of orange. Because I know that water, there's times when I want something other than water. So you can make the water a little bit more interesting, but the key is water. Soda isn't gonna hydrate. Juice can be really high in sugar. And so the more water we do with the kids, the better. The next piece is protein. Protein and good fats, I'll actually talk about those two together. Protein and good fats are the fuel we need for our brain and body to work. And what's great about protein and fats is it takes our bodies a while to burn through those energy sources to utilize them, which means we're going to get less in the way of peaks and valleys and more in the way of sustained energy. Again, I use my kids as examples all the time because I learn more from them than any book or classroom. Both of my kids, when they start to get to the point of being whiny and negative and more on that meltdown side of things, more often than not, if we plug protein into them 20 minutes later, they're back to their sweet, happy selves. So again, when you're thinking about, it's not just about getting your kid a snack right after school, it's about getting them a strategic snack so that you can have a productive next hour or so with them with homework. I know it can be challenging with kids to get protein in. Not all kids love meat, not all kids love nuts. We've got a ton of kids with nut allergies or dairy sensitivities. So sometimes it does take a little bit of creativity. Holly Larson, our Brain Balance nutritionist, is incredible. She's got just Facebook albums full of snack and lunch ideas for kids, full of healthy proteins and good fats. But a couple quick things. My kids love, peanut butter toast, or we alternate between butter. So sometimes we do cashew butter, sometimes almond butter, sometimes peanut butter, and we'll put it on just about anything. A wrap, we'll put it on rice cakes, we'll put them on bananas, apple slices, toast. We do a lot of protein shakes where you can add some frozen fruit in there. You can sneak in some spinach as well that they can't see or taste. But really, and again, brainstorm with your kids. Tell them, if you want that other snack that you want, first have some protein. So let's think of some protein ideas that you would like. Again, Pinterest has some great ideas. Sometimes getting the kids involved in the picking of the snacks or making of the snacks can help them to be a little more adventurous with what they're willing to try and willing to do. Why not sugar? I know, again, we all gravitate towards sugar. And why is sugar so problematic? Is when we have sugar, our body uses sugar as the energy source. And so we're going to get a quick spike, but we burn through sugar really, really quickly as a source of energy, which means we're going to get a spike and then we're going to get a crash. And when we get that sugar crash, we're going to be tired, sluggish, irritable, and we're going to want more sugar. If you watch yourself, if you're around Halloween time and you're used to every day after school coming home and having, 1 or 2 little candy bars, before you know it, every day at 3 o'clock, you're going to be craving and thinking about that sugar source. Whatever we have with sugar, you're going to start to crave it at that same time every day. And again, when your body burns through that energy source, you're going to want more of it. So it's one of those kind of self-perpetuating negative cycles. So we can replace the sugars with proteins and healthy fats, which again are slow burning energy sources that's going to mainline that focus and behavior much more. So again, it doesn't mean no sugar ever with our kids, but think it through. If you've got a time where you need your child to sit down and focus to get through homework, that's not the time for the bowl of ice cream or the candy bar. I'm going to have the pushback and argument with my child to have an apple with peanut butter instead, and save that ice cream treat that's full of sugar for a different occasion when their behavior and mood and energy and focus is less important. So setting yourself up for success is going to be protein and good fat rather than sugar. When we talk about we want to feed them, we want to wake them up. This goes back to what I was saying with Fortune 500 companies understand that movement matters. So you see more and more companies that are doing these stand-up desks. I got to spend time at an engineering firm not that long ago, and I have to admit I didn't think it was going to be a ton of fun to spend a day with engineers, and it was such an interesting day. And one of the things that I loved is they all had these stand-up workstations, because we know when we move our body, it wakes up our brain. And so there's a ton of studies showing increased productivity, increased focus, increased memory when we're using our muscles. So this means give your kids a chance to wiggle and move and run and play before homework time. I have the alarm clock here because this is such a great way to understand this. Is one of the ways that we wake up first thing in the morning, or one of the ways that our brain allows us to fall asleep at night, has to do with our muscles. When we lay in bed at night and we start to relax to go to sleep, we're relaxing every muscle in our body. We're not fighting against gravity to stand up. We're not moving. And that relaxation of the muscles has a huge part to play in our brain's ability to turn off and relax, to quiet and go to sleep. When that alarm goes off first thing in the morning, we roll over and smack it to turn it off. And then the next thing that we do is we stretch. And when we stretch, it fires an input from a muscle through a nerve into the brain to wake up the brain. So again, we want to teach our kids those lifelong strategies of move to pay attention, move to focus, move to increase your memory. And to me, it's so important that with our kids that we're not using exercise and movement as a punishment, but as a positive thing. We're teaching them that you can have more control over your focus, your mood, your energy by how you move your body. And it doesn't have to be, you know, they get to go run and play for an hour before homework time. It might be, hey buddy, you've got 15 minutes after you finish your snack to go move and wiggle and play as much as you want. And then in 15 minutes when that, you know, alarm goes or your timer goes off, we're going to sit down and get that homework done. And the sooner we get it done, the more time you have to hang out later. Same thing goes for our high school, college kids, is again, if we want productive time, take a few minutes to move first and then sit down and focus. And then the other piece, cheer them up. Again, kids can come home from school tired and cranky. So taking a few minutes to hit that reset button, because at homework time isn't always fun. The kids, again, you know, maybe they're working on something that they don't understand or that they don't want to be doing. And so hitting that reset button, so we've got that smile and that happy kid that we're working with rather than that frustrated and irritable child. So what are ways that we can do to take just a few minutes to cheer them up? Again, movement matters. It's funny, you know, scroll through your phone and look at pictures. When you have pictures of your kids doing something physical and active, you're typically going to see pretty big grins on their faces. So again, you don't have time to go kayaking before you sit down and do homework. I get that. But taking a few minutes to jump rope, ride a bike, jump on the trampoline, run up and down the stairs, just doing something, playing tag to move is going to help to reset that mood and attitude. Protein to regulate the blood sugars is going to help. Positive interactions. So taking a few minutes to spend some quality face-to-face time with your child, to set aside your phone, set aside your work, and focus on your child. Kids love nothing more than to have your undivided attention. And it doesn't have to be 3 hours worth, but even just 10 minutes of, you know, tell me all about your day. Or if you've got a child that doesn't want to talk about their day and you don't want to drag it out of them, just doing something with them, being physically present with them can really make them feel cherished, appreciated, and connected. I know for my kids, for Drew, my little guy that's in the kayaking picture here, playing catch with him. And for the record, he's very good. I'm not. But when I go outside and we can play catch for 5 minutes, that's when he tells me all about his day and what they did on the playground and the funny story from lunch, is when I do something physical and interactive with him. So taking a few minutes to go for a walk together, go on a bike ride, play a game, just sit together and talk, just spending a few minutes of undivided attention where there's no pressure prior to sitting down and doing homework can help to really reset that. So what is required for homework success? We need a good environment for the working space, and we need good focus. So when we're thinking about the environment that we're creating for our kids, think about what you yourself like in a work environment. It's interesting, I spent nearly 10 years working in a brain balance center, so high energy, lots of people all around, great natural lighting, and then I shifted to a position where I primarily work from home unless I travel. And I've had to shift my workspace in the house because I realized I need good daylight. I need a space that's away from sound and distractions for me to focus and be in a happy place. So think about what you yourself like in a work environment and then apply that to your kids, because it's possible that they're very similar. Another thing to keep in mind with the work environment is that our kids like to be near us. You can have the most amazing playroom or office upstairs for them, but you'll notice, unless they're high schoolers or middle schoolers where they want to be in their room with their door shut, they're going to choose the space next to you no matter how cool the other space is. So for my family, what's worked really well is we have a big center island in the kitchen. And we set up homework time there. Now, 2 kids, they do best if they're not sitting at the same table, so they're not touching each other or getting in each other's space or distracted by ways to annoy each other. But I can bring my laptop in and be working on my work in the kitchen, or I can be prepping dinner and loading, unloading the dishwasher. So I'm physically near them, but still allowing them to work independently. But then I'm close by if they have a quick question or need some redirection. So when you're thinking about that space, think about what's a way that you can be present, but still giving them some space and independence, and a space where they've got everything that they need right there. Again, our kids, when they're procrastinating and trying to get out of doing something, love to, oh, I need a glass of water. Oh, I need to go to the bathroom. Oh, I need colored pencils. So to have everything right there, all set up, ready to go, so you can just sit down and knock it out, can be helpful. We have to think about the noise and the visual distractions. Not all of our brains buffer those distractions equally. A mature brain has the ability to block out background noise and to block out extra visual stimuli. An immature brain does not. And so many of our kids that are struggling with homework time also struggle with gaps and holes in development and attention and focus, which means their brain is probably taking in more information than your brain and my brain. So while I can tune out the fact that the dog's barking and there's maybe a conversation happening in the other room, my child, who's younger than I am, and if the child has any aspects of immaturity, they're going to have a more difficult time doing that. So just because you can block out that background noise or visual stimuli doesn't mean your child has the same ability to do that. And I always, think about what the child's ability is and then hold them accountable for that, not for what we think they should do because they're 10 years old or whatever the age may be. So doing something like using noise canceling headphones may help to block out sound. I don't recommend having music or television on in the background, no matter how many times your kids tell you that they like that. They need to be at least 13 years old development-wise, which again, just because they're 13 doesn't mean all aspects of development are 13 before their brain can really start to dual process that information. So recommending having the environment as quiet and distraction-free as possible, especially the younger they are. And I want to talk quick about different aspects of attention and focus. And I go into this in more depth in some of the other webinars. But we think all the time of, oh, as long as my kid likes what they're doing, their attention and focus is great. So it's not a focus issue. It's just that they don't like math. Well, there's a couple different types of attention and focus. We have our short-term reward-driven attention and focus, which is really actually only a couple seconds of focus, and then the brain gets a reward, which encourages them to focus again. So when we're playing video games, watching television, checking things on social media, those are all examples of those short-term reward-driven aspects of attention and focus. That's not the focus we need for homework. Homework needs the sustained pathways of attention and focus, the boring, non-reward driven. I bring this up just because so many of our kids on a daily basis are getting tons and tons of exposure to utilizing those short-term reward-driven pathways, which means they're strengthening those reward-driven pathways. We also need our kids to strengthen the sustained pathways, which means let them be bored, have them read a book, have them do a chore that takes some time that isn't rewarding. So just making sure we're finding time to build those sustained pathways, because those are the pathways needed for homework. So what engages the brain to help turn on that attention and focus? Two of the strongest engagers of the brain are our senses and our muscles. So a way, when you think about that home environment, to engage the senses, I love diffusing essential oils. And really and truly, any smell is going to be engaging to the brain. So if you have a particular smell that you really like, or that your child likes, and again, to create some positive routines around the homework experience of let your child choose the smell for the diffuser, and you're going to put on this pretty smell, and we're going to sit in this nice area that's clutter-free and free of distractions, so that we can all focus for a little bit to get our work done. And again, using the muscles to turn on the brain. There's a great book that I quote and refer to often. It's called Spark by Dr. John Rady, and he talks a lot in this book about the impact of muscles on learning and focus. And what he says is studies have shown that attention and focus, or excuse me, that memory can be enhanced up to 20% if we use our muscles first. And we also know that it can increase attention and focus. So again, before you sit down, do homework, we want your kids to move. So here's some ways to implement movement into that process is prior to starting homework, increase the heart rate and use the muscles. What's great with this is it doesn't need to necessarily be, I need you to go for a 3-mile run before we do homework, but just taking even just 3 to 5 minutes before starting homework to spike that heart rate and use the muscles. Now, the funny thing is when you first start doing this and you have your kids, you know, play tag quick or sprint or do burpees or jump 100 times, it's going to jazz them up, it's going to spike their energy, and they might be wiggly, giggly, silly when you have them sit down and focus. Put this into your daily routine and habit, and pretty soon it'll become just a part of the norm of we're going to turn on our muscles, so we turn on our brain so we can sit down and focus. The next thing is those 1-minute brain breaks. This is such a powerful tool. Is again, our kids sat all day and now we're asking them to sit and do homework. And we want to give them natural breaks. Now, for a young, early elementary school child, I would want to give them a 1-minute brain break every 15 to 20 minutes. Now, I'm not going to interrupt them in the middle of what they're doing to have them get up and do a brain break. So if they finish spelling and now we're going to pull out reading, that would be the natural time to do it. But again, just getting up, excuse me, for 1 minute and moving before we sit down and focus again. I love getting the kids involved, and so taking some time this Saturday and writing out on a piece of paper with your kids as many funny, goofy muscle ideas as you can think of, and then cut them up on pieces of paper, put them in a bowl, and when that 1-minute brain break time comes up, draw that piece of paper from the bowl and do whatever's on the paper. You can do anything from squats or push-ups or box jumps to run up and down the stairs, do a plank, get silly, get goofy, get creative. These are kids, make it fun. Maybe you've got a bear crawl across the floor or crab crawl. Look at ideas for on Pinterest for 1-minute brain breaks. Just doing something to engage the muscles, sit back down and focus again. The other time when it's really helpful and really important to use your muscles is when you start to see your child heading towards that meltdown. If a child is starting to get to the point of meltdown, using those muscles, spiking that heart rate can help to engage parts of the brain that are going to help to regulate that and control that, to pull that back in. So sometimes taking that brain break can actually help you avoid that meltdown where now you're going to lose a ton of time on attention and focus with the meltdown. So depending on your child's age and depending on their development is going to depend on how frequently you need to do those brain breaks. Watch your child. When they start to get antsy, fidgety, that can be a great time to do it. And then as their development and maturity increases, you can start to go longer between those brain breaks. So going back to that moment of meltdown, we all have those moments of meltdown, whether we're a child or an adult. We all have those times where the frustration gets to be too much. So wanted to talk about a couple things on how to avoid that meltdown. The first thing is to know your child's cues. The meltdowns typically don't come out of the blue from nowhere. You're usually slowly building and working towards that. And again, right away, ask yourself, when was the last time my child had protein? Did they get enough sleep last night? You can't change sleep in the moment. You can change protein in the moment, and 20 minutes later, they typically are in a better place. A lot of kids will start to get really whiny, really sweaty, agitated, squirmy as they're building that way. They're starting to shut down. So again, watch for those cues. And what tends to happen as a frustrated parent with too much on our plates is when our child starts to shut down and get whiny and I don't want to do this and this is too hard, we tend to come over them, not under them. We get frustrated, and when we get frustrated, our voice gets firmer, our voice gets louder. And for some of our kids, that can trigger that fight or flight response. So when our child is close, they're teetering on that edge of meltdown, and then we yell at them, we are often the ones pushing them over the edge into that meltdown. And so we need to be the one that pulls them back away from that meltdown into tipping them into it. Easier said than done. I talk about this all the time, and that doesn't mean that I don't still yell at my kids on occasion during homework time. But just a couple simple strategies is learning to come under our kids rather than over them. When you're starting to get frustrated and upset, if they're getting loud, we tend to get louder. We've got to do the opposite. Buddy, right now, I just need you to focus. Let's take a minute. Let's take a brain break. Calm down. We can get through this. The fewer words, the better. And so think low, calm, quiet. Light, gentle touch. Studies show that human touch can be very calming and soothing. And so again, think calm, gentle, quiet, not big, angry, loud to avoid that meltdown. Deep breaths can be great. Movement can be great. Having a snack can be good. When we start to eat food or chew, it engages a different part of our brain. And so now I don't want you to get in the habit of every time your child's going to have a meltdown that you're plugging snacks into them. But just know that those are a couple pieces that can help with that. Once a meltdown happens, it can take a minimum of 20 minutes to recover from that. So the brain's not going to be ready to pay attention, focus, and learn until it's fully reset. And it can take even longer, especially if there's any gaps and holes in development. So the recovery from those meltdown modes, and this is whether the child is 17 and frustrated and melting down, or 4 and frustrated and melting down, and the how to avoid it and the recovery from it are the same strategies. Calm, quiet, gentle, chewing gum, eating a snack, using the heart or using your muscles and spiking your heart rate are again all great tools to utilize in that moment. You know, for our kids, we want positive rewards wherever we can. We want them at work, we want them in relationships, we want them from our parents. And so finding your child's currency, what works for your child. And I always try to encourage families, think in terms of positive reinforcement whenever you can, and experience. I don't love rewarding with food or material things. Think our kids just want our time, they want our attention. And so, you know, reading an extra book at bedtime or playing a game together, or for the older child, you know, going and shooting basketballs together in the neighborhood can be some great strategies. Obviously, the reward charts, the motivators are going to vary tremendously by age. But again, young kids, stickers go so far and are such a simple thing. For older kids, having a chart of improvement of, you know what, last week on average it was taking you 2 hours to get through your homework. Let's see if we can get that down to an hour and 45 minutes this week, and then that gives us some extra time to go do something else. So set goals collaboratively with your child, and then look at ways that you can reach those together. With my daughter, using a timer was helpful. With my son, he could care less about the time. So again, it's finding that currency with your child. My daughter loves to write. And so if it was homework time that involved writing, it could go on and on and on forever because she would get so caught up in the storytelling. So for my daughter, Morgan, setting a timer to say, hey, you should be done with this reading assignment in 20 minutes helped her. And we did it on the stove timer so she could see it counting down. So it would help keep her on track. So timers, goals, charts, rewards to be working towards are all pieces that you can modify for the age to think about for your child. So again, what we know is if there's gaps and holes anywhere in development, it's going to make our behavior, our focus, our academics less consistent, and it can make that homework time even more challenging. So we know maturing and addressing those gaps and holes in development can make all of those pieces come together more easily. great example of this, we'll come back to this slide. Jackson is a student that did brain balance years ago. He's a junior in high school this year, and he did brain balance at the end of 3rd grade. He's the classic kid of super bright, super social, awesome kid. Homework time was rough at home. It would be a ton of whining. I can't do this. I'm stupid. What's wrong with me? It's too hard. They would sit down to do it, and on a 3rd grade level, they were spending at least 2 hours a night on homework, and that was to keep him just barely caught up. In North Carolina, they did the end of grade exam that in 3rd grade is kind of a prep year. It really starts to matter in 4th grade. And this kid that his parents knew was smart did absolutely just rough on the reading and math section. And so family reached out to us. They were worried, needed to get things in track, and the extra time spent working on reading wasn't getting him there. He just wasn't getting the traction. And so we were able to do brain balance with him. He did program for 3 months. And what was fun is the next year, he did it spring and into summer. And the next year, that they didn't do any tutoring or anything else over the summer. The academic test, he scored a little bit higher, and by the end of the following year, he was on track and ahead, doing fantastic, and he's maintained that. He's a junior now. And again, what they saw was an increase in his confidence, an increase in his independence and ability to do things on his own. He needed less repetition to get things to stick. And so that homework time, again, went from a really negative experience to less of a negative experience. I don't think he ever got to the point of loving homework. He's a kid after all. But again, they just saw such an increase in his confidence, in the output on an exams and grades. And again, the parent in me wants every child to reach their potential and just do the best they can. And you want those kids to have great confidence. So let me back up. Brain Balance, we're a program, we do work with kids from 4 all the way through college now. We've recently expanded into a college age program, and we're able to see change with kids of all ages. It's fun at every age because it's different. Our older kids are able to speak to and talk about what they can feel and notice as a difference in themselves. Our younger kids, it's all about getting them on track, kind of even hopefully before they even realize that maybe there is an area of challenge for them. So we are a personalized program, and again, we're here to help fill in those gaps and holes in development, setting the kids up for just the best possible success going forward. Victoria, do you want to share this last part?
Yeah, sure. We got everybody's questions. We're just going to go over a couple little things and we can get into them. We appreciate you attending with us today just so much. As a thank you for registering, we wanted to review this slide with you. We're going to be sending you a link to download our tips for creating the optimal homework environment guide. We put this guide together to give you valuable steps to take to help decrease stress and to help increase productivity, maybe not have your child love homework time, like Rebecca just said, but increase that productivity during homework time. Please look for an email for us with a link to download the resource as well as the webinar recording. I had a couple of you asking if you can see a slide a second time, etc. We can review some of your questions, but you will have full access to webinar recording on a landing page link and the ability to download this guide. If you see your child falling behind developmentally, if you identify any of the challenges with focus or attention that we discussed today, we really encourage you to reach out to us for help. I put our website on this slide so that if you're feeling like you want to ask additional questions beyond what you're able to type into the question box specific to your family, please go to our website. Please go to our locations page, find your local center, inquire with them by filling out a form, and they'll contact you and you can ask any detailed and specific question relating to your family to either get connected with additional resources from Brain Balance or go in and meet with a center about your specific child. What we'll do now, Rebecca, if you could go to the next slide, is we'll take some of our questions.
Yes.
Okay, awesome. I had a lot of comments when you had said You had that initial photo up of the child balancing a pencil on their nose. A lot of you commented saying, yes, absolutely, my child, all the time. It was just immediate. So thank you guys for commenting along with us. The
We
first
try to keep.
question is from Annie. Hi, Annie. She says, my son is dyslexic. Does brain balance help with dyslexic children? This is a great question, a very common one.
Yes, yes, yes. I absolutely love working with our kids with dyslexia. Now, Brain Balance, we're not a medical center, so we're not here to diagnose that. Our focus is what can we do to improve the parts of the brain that result in those challenges. So our goal is not to create compensatory strategies, but to change the way the brain connects and takes in information so that everything's more successful going forward. And we see if I were to paint a picture of what that would look like going through program, is you just start to see the academics clicking and sticking, the reading smoothing out, less of the jumping and skipping, better comprehension because less work is going into it. And so I could do just a whole center of just working with students with those challenges, because it's so fun when you watch the difference in the child's confidence, where they're like, hey, I know I can do this. That's my favorite.
Okay, awesome. We have a question from someone in Switzerland. Sabrina, hello. Thank you so much for joining us. I assume that it's nighttime for you. I know you're probably about 6 hours ahead. She says, we live in Switzerland and follow Brain Balance blog and posts and webinars all the time. Thank you so much for following us from a different country. Our daughter could benefit tremendously from your program, but unfortunately is not available here. Do you offer a remote program which we could participate in, because we're really struggling and I'm willing to make this work however we can? Your recommendations and inputs would be greatly appreciated.
I don't have an immediate answer for that, but I can say stay tuned, keep following us, because you are not alone or unique in that scenario. And so absolutely, we are wanting to be able to expand our reach. So please continue to watch and follow all those sources and avenue channels.
Awesome, thank you. For the end of the presentation, Mary asked, should an ASD child be limited in extracurricular activities? Is there a rule for age and amount of homework? I have a 5-year-old with ASD and a twin neurotypical daughter.
Busy household. To me, there's not a hard set rule on that. It's about watching your child, because you can have 10 kids all on the spectrum, and what's right for each of those 10 kids may vary. I am a big believer that kids need downtime. They've got to be bored, otherwise they're never going to learn how to self-entertain. So I am a fan of some activities and involvement. It doesn't need to be formal structured, but get outside, move, run, play, try new things, challenge yourselves. But I don't think it's ideal for kids to be in structured activities every day of the week. I watch my own kids, and on Saturday, they don't want to leave the house. They need that downtime to just regroup after a busy week. So not a set rule there. Same with homework time. Certainly a 5-year-old, especially with any aspects of neurodevelopmental concern, the attention and focus is going to be less. And so you might have a 5-year-old, but attention and focus might realistically be closer to that of a 2 or 3-year-old. And so picture, what would my expectation for a 3-year-old be here? So that child might need more brain breaks to get through the information. And you'll see as maturity and development comes up, that attention and focus will expand along with it.
Awesome, thank you. Another question from Amy. Hi, Amy. She said, is it helpful for them to listen to the Brain Balance music while doing homework? And I'd like to expand this to just any music.
No, I actually prefer no background noise. No, regardless of how great the music is, you're asking your child's brain to multitask by introducing more stimuli when we're already asking them to multitask. And so the older we are, the better we do with multitasking our brain and using many areas all in sync. That's harder for a younger child than it is for us. So my recommendation is minimal stimuli for success. And then as they get older and more mature, then you can start to layer on and add on those pieces more successfully. And same with sleep. Sleep is our brain's time and our body's time to rest and recover. And so I don't recommend any music or any music during sleep. We want to minimize stimulation so that we are able to have deep and restful recovery sleep.
Okay, another question from Amy. What if a child refuses to take a break because they just want to get home and get homework started and done?
You know, don't let this come into turn into a power struggle, and it's so easy for that to happen. And as soon as we're at that power struggle mode, everybody loses. And so if your child wants to come home and get homework done, don't fight it, run with it. But again, I would do protein snack in the car on the way home. I would, you know, encourage, hey, when you're done with one subject and you're switching to the next, maybe that's the time to take a minute to run in place. Maybe your child doesn't need the 20 minutes to run around. Maybe they can take 3 to 5 minutes, but I would encourage you to set a routine of doing a little bit of muscles and movement right before and as a brain break, but that right before could be jump 100 times and then sit down and do it. So it doesn't need to be long. If your kid wants to come home and get it out, knock it out of the park, that's awesome. Run with it. Don't fight it, but you can still work those tips in.
Awesome, thank you. Okay, next question. We have so many questions. We're going to try to get them all in. Do you have suggested time intervals for brain breaks in junior high, high school?
You know, I still wouldn't go longer than 30 minutes. So 20 minutes is often good. But again, if your child's in the middle of something and they're focused and working on something, run with it. But when they finish that math assignment or that paragraph that they're working on, then that's the time to take that 20-minute or that 1-minute brain break. So again, you know, it's more about your individual child and where they're at developmentally than saying the rule is in junior high, it's 30 minutes. Because again, we could have a 14-year-old that developmentally is 14 or 8. And so the answer can vary based on the child. So watch them. Again, when they start to get fidgety, when you find yourself redirecting, then you probably went a little bit too long. If you can catch it before that, that's even better. But that can be your clue or cue of when to implement that.
Okay, awesome. We have, right, sorry, I'm trying to read through them all so I can anticipate, and I lost my place. Okay,
Yeah.
what can be done about mobile addiction? This is a great one.
Oh, yes. That's so hard, and we're seeing that increase more and more and more. And just like sugar, the more you have, the more you need. It's the same thing with our short-term reward-driven pathways. When we're doing something that rewards the brain now seeks and craves that reward. And so it is a matter of minimizing that exposure, and we've got to replace it with something. And what the best thing to replace that is movement. So but that's going to be hard, right? The child that isn't used to self-entertaining, they're depending on that mobile device, on social media and gaming for entertainment. And when we take it away, you're going to get, I'm bored, and you're always going to get more in the way of negative behaviors after screen time, because it's fatiguing the part of the brain that gives us emotional regulation, or it fatigues the brain and it's not engaging the parts of the brain that controls that. And so we need to work towards minimizing those reward pieces in the brain, because we need to be able to focus and function and do things in life without the brain dopamine rewards that happen with those reward pieces. And so easier said than done. And the older the child is, the harder it is to restrict it when they have technology at school and they have to do homework on technology. But really setting restrictions and boundaries as much as you can. If it means taking it out of the house, you might have to get it out of the house. I'm not a professional in working with those addiction strategies with with technology, but it is a very real thing, and we're seeing more and more of it. But starting with restrictions of, if it's not homework, then we're moving. And sometimes it's changing habits and routines. It's Saturday morning, get up and out of the house as a family and go do something, because if you're not out of the house, then the computer and phone is all right there. And so trying to replace the downtime where there's access to technology with more movement can be really helpful.
Awesome, thank you. Okay, we have a lot of questions. Rebecca, are you okay with extending this out about 5 more minutes to answer a
Yeah,
few
I am.
more?
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
All right. I don't want anyone to put their question out there and then we're not able to answer it. I'm really trying to. We'll get to as many more as we can. We have a great question. How much? I wanted to ask. This is from Francis. How much homework time is too much? I think that depends on the age. But.
What develops the brain is movement, not homework. And I apologize to any of the teachers out there. It's not that, it's just, I don't know. I hate to see the kids coming home and spending 2 hours doing homework. And again, to me, a red flag, if you're having to spend a lot of time on something, it might be because the brain isn't taking in the information properly. That could be a red flag that something needs to be addressed to make that experience more effective, more beneficial. Same with tutoring is, there's a time and place for tutoring, but you have to ask yourself, the question is my child needing tutoring because they weren't exposed to the information, or are they not absorbing and retaining the information appropriately? And so sometimes spending more time on the same thing isn't productive. And so needing to take a step back to say, why is this taking so long, can be more constructive than year after year of 2 hours plus of homework a night.
Okay, thank you. Michelle asks, my son is attending a charter school where we are homeschooling for the first time this year for 5th grade. They are going to do a full assessment since he's due for his tri-annual review because of his IEP. How is the assessment at Brain Balance different than how is the IEP assessment different than what you offer at Brain Balance? How can the results that are obtained from the assessment be provided to the new charter school and tutors I'm hiring?
Sure. So, I'm not an educator, so I can't speak to what the IEP assessment is. I have seen quite a few over the years. The goal and focus of the Brain Balance assessment is to see what areas are on track and what areas aren't. And we're looking at functional pieces that all lead to success with attention and focus, socialization, behavior, learning. And so we're not as concerned with, is the child at grade level with reading, but we're looking at all of the tools that go into success with reading and comprehension. So are the eyes moving and coordinating the way they're supposed to? Is there appropriate processing speed time? Is comprehension where it needs to be? So the Brain Balance assessment is looking to see, is your child at an age appropriate level in all of these different areas? And what's great is research shows that when challenges are present, often it's related to areas of underconnectivity in the brain. Parts of the brain aren't firing and connecting the way they're supposed to. And research also shows that we're able to change that when we address these things in a really specific way and move that forward. So the focus of the Brain Balance assessment is to pinpoint those areas that are potentially holding things back so that we can create an action plan to build connectivities in those areas so that we see a reduction in the challenges, an improvement in the output. So our assessment is not designed as a tool to help with an IEP, it's designed as a tool to create an action plan for change. So truly it's designed as a tool to help us at Brain Balance create the necessary plan to move your child forward. What's great about it is it's going to give you information that you don't get anywhere else, that helps you understand the whys behind the challenges. So often parents will think it's just, oh, a quirk in behavior, or, well, my husband was that way, and so that's why my son is. This assessment allows us to really kind of pinpoint and answer some of those questions. It can answer the question of, is it because he's a 7-year-old boy, or is there something that's holding things back? So I hope that answered that question.
Okay, I'm going to just answer a quick, we're getting a lot of similar questions, so I'm going to answer one of them, and then we'll ask Rebecca the last question. I'll try to summarize everyone's big question at the end. First of all, getting a lot of questions about how can they find out more about brain balance, and how can we help high school age students? Is it too late? Absolutely. So first of all, I would go to brainbalance.com. You can also find us on Facebook or Instagram on this slide. Please, please find a center closest to you and call to ask some questions. It is not too late in high school. And in fact, we really feel that now is the time, based off of our experience. We want to set kids up to help them through their challenges and struggles, and fill in and help the gaps and holes in development that might be holding them back, because then we can set them up for their future for success. Secondly, Becca, this is going to be the last question. A lot of parents, about 5 or 6, asked about homework refusal in high schoolers, and tips around, what do I do if my child just straight up refuses to either get started or get their homework done altogether?
I am not a psychologist, so I don't know that I'm the best one to answer that question. But, to me, I always look at things through the lens of development. And so often we avoid doing what's challenging or hard for us. And so I would ask myself the question, why? Is it a power struggle thing? Is it or is it that something's more difficult for them than what it should be, and so they don't want to engage? I see it over and over where in our high school ages, if things are too hard, they shut down. And when we're able to get the brain firing and connecting and revved up, we can often see some really positive changes in that. So to me, it's why is something harder than what it should be? Is the child falling behind? That's the lens that I would look at that through. And again, as a not psychologist, I'm not the professional one to give guidance on this, but trying to avoid the power struggle, trying to find the motivation for your child. What are their goals? Are they wanting to be a Navy SEAL? And, talking to them and framing them things up in that way, so that we can be a positive encouragement and support, because it's so easy to let it become that argument power struggle scenario. Like Victoria said, thank you so much. It's overwhelming how many people log in and watch these. We want to continue to deliver the content that you need and want, so please reach out. Let us know, what topics would you like to hear more about. You can go to brainbalancecenters.com. You can follow us on Facebook and Instagram. I'm brand new to Instagram. You can find me at Dr. Rebecca Jackson on Instagram. Again, it's brand new. I'm learning social media, but want to be able to continue to deliver relevant and helpful content for everyone. So thank you so much for your participation. Hopefully it was helpful information, and keep in touch. Let us know what you want to learn more and hear more about, so we can continue to deliver valuable and informative information.
Okay, awesome. Thank you, Rebecca. Thanks, everyone. Have a great day.
Thanks.